Debuting in the Meteorot's Reloaded manga as an upgrade body for Metsubi, it is the Oriental Samurai Beetle type, KBT14 Musha Beetle, with a kit of Shooter Core, Longshot, Charge Buster, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Fortress, which grants a passive additional damage reduction to self when attacked by enemies. Now, Musha Beetle is most certainly a model that we are no stranger to. He has been around in the Reloaded manga for a pretty hot minute after his official debut as an Ori Meta winner from the KBT KWG Ori Meta contest a good year and a half or so ago at time of recording. But finally joining the fray with a beautiful 3D model and a very powerful kit to boot, Musha Beetle is ready to show that sometimes you don't need to be the latest in fashion statements to make your mark on the field. Shooter Core on the head part is a support-based skill and the first instance of it on a non-collab model. But to explain Shooter Core briefly, it's essentially Shoot Boost, which is 50% boost to shooting type damage used from himself or his allies, but will also apply a stack of Radar Sight to himself as well, which is a 50% boost to success between him and everyone across the party. In addition to this, Radar Sight also is best known for removing any stealth or conceal effects of the enemy side, which means that if they try to hide in the dark or stay out of your way, put one use of this sucker on your team and very likely no one is going to be hiding from you any longer. And that means if they try to stay out of sight, you can still lay your crosshairs on them and give them an absolute death time across the team. Longshot on the right arm is a conventional shooting skill that has been making a lot of very impressive rounds for its wonderful and albeit conditional damage output it can bring to the table. But to explain Longshot briefly, it has a damage counter relative to how far away the target is from Musha Beetle. So that means if you just barely outrun them to the center line, you probably won't be dealing nearly as much damage as intended, even though you are packing a very impressive over 1700 base power there on a non-heavy Longshot no less. But the farther away the target is, such as catching them at the very beginning of their heat phase or the very end of their cooldown phase, that's where you're going to be really laying on the pain and really putting in the meaning of the term sniper shot from afar. Charge Buster on the left arm, and we've had this since launch. It's nothing special, but still a very powerful skill all the same. Simply explained, Charge Buster will draw upon the power of the user's Metaforce gauge by consuming a small amount of it when attacking. However, upon consuming this small charge, it will fuel into Charge Buster for a higher damage bonus, relative to the amount of total percentage you have in your gauge. So this alone means it'll have a little bit of a step in Metaforce sustain to a point, but it's not going to be nearly as required as it would say for Ghost or Ghost Shot or Beam or Hyper Beam or Beam Sword. Charge Buster is an attack that you can, if you have the charge for it, it's great, but it's not going to be something that makes or breaks you if you have a charge or no charge at all. Biped legs, and very akin to pretty much every other member of the KBT family, means that he has very good coverage across all terrains and arguably the most diverse coverage when it comes to terrain compatibility. But that's not even touching on the tip of the iceberg here. Compared to most other models of the KBT family which have some kind of mastery, be it in very high power output or very high weight or being able to transform, Musha Beetle makes it very clear that his role on the field is not necessarily high base power, which he does absolutely have, but it's also in the case of his armor. And speaking of armor, he is packing about 4,500 for that head, about 3,350 for the right arm, almost 3,800 for the left, and just shy of 4,000 HP on the legs. So a very healthy HP pool. And even though one may argue that that's relatively par for the course for most KBT types, let me stop you right there and ask you, have you looked at his leg ability yet? Because if you bring that into consideration, that's a passive free 20 to 30% damage reduction just for having the legs equipped. And that's also not touching on his melee or shoot resist, which I will get to in just a moment. But this means that on top of having very healthy armor numbers and decent good power, he's packing a very useful leg ability that's useful right out of the gate, will help him pretty much anytime he gets hammered, whether it be from a free crit or even from a love tap that he manages to graze or tank at no damage. But on the topic of his legs that make this even better, a melee resist to 774, not terrible. That's probably going to be one of his big weaknesses there, but it's also kind of on the lower end, lower bare minimum in my personal opinion. And a shoot resist to 1306 is kind of par for the course for standard shooter types like Musha Beetle, but tie the Fortress leg ability on this, and this makes this a little easier to stomach, and a lot easier for him to keep the damage on him as low as possible. A mobility of 831 is exceptionally nice, though, as it means he's packing the armor, the power, and the speed on top of that to keep up with the big dogs that might want to possibly gun him down faster than he'd want to stay on the field. However, another notable weakness of his is the fact that he has an evade of 735, so even though he is packing a lot of heavy armor and damage reduction with good power, he won't be dodging or grazing a lot. So do keep that in mind if you do choose to use Musha Beetle, whether it be as pure set or mixed parts, and just know ahead of time that he won't be putting an emphasis on dodging or grazing, and mostly just pumping the enemy full as many holes as he can. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I very easily have to rate Musha Beetle a very solid 8.5 out of 10. Compared to most other models, which may tend to have one kind of mastery, and if it gets broken, that kind of hinders their overall viability, Musha Beetle has very good synergy within himself. Shooter Core can pump into Longshot and Charge Buster exceptionally well, and even though Longshot does have a pretty hefty damage, conditional damage, a base power of over 1700 is still really hard to knock, especially because it's a non-heavy long shot at that. Charge Buster, again, for good power and metaphor sustain, means he can pretty much alternate between either arm and really not have anything going against him. And again, with Fortress as a leg ability, this does guarantee he can stay on the field as long as he possibly can and keep his damage to an absolute minimum as long as he remains on the field. As mixed parts, I do very easily have to rate him equally at an 8.5 out of 10 for these same reasons. Biped legs with Fortress, it's honestly really hard to beat, because even with Tyrell Beetle as example, who also has this leg ability as a bipedal leg, Musha Beetle packs this just a little bit better because his stats are just a little bit more rounded than the Gargantuan King Stag Beetle type. Longshot, Charge Buster, conventional shooting skills, one with a very impressive damage bonus relative to distance, really can't go wrong with those, and Shooter Core for your conventional shooter types, whether that be Musha Beetle himself or anyone else on the team that could benefit from that. Musha Beetle is an oriental type that once again shows you don't have to have the latest and greatest fashion statement or design to show you can also have the most commanding presence on the field.